I want to see if we can sort of iterate a little bit towards areas where the blockchain will actually be useful and where it's worth investing a little bit of effort in it. So let me just skip through. Did I mention I had a new book out? I can't remember if I did. Okay, I'm going to say one or two mildly critical things, but before I say that, I just want to sort of put a stake in the ground and say, I understand that there are real problems that people are trying to solve. So I'm not mocking or undermining the fact that people have spotted real problems and they really want to solve them. So let's just be very clear about that. And obviously we're talking about financial services, so I've tended to focus on financial services, and here you can see, you know, risk, compliance. I like fraudsters. I mean, you probably shouldn't, but I sort of sneakingly, well, because they're on the margins and they show us the way forward in some of these areas. So I'm particularly interested in the fact that identity fraud in the UK is at absolutely all-time highs. That strikes me as rather interesting, given what Bill was saying a bit earlier on. Compliance spending. So for most of I don't work for the exciting fintechs. I work for the legacy infrastructure people, and I just want to be really, you know, like, if you guys could figure out a way of sending money 2% cheaper between RBS and Barclays, I really wouldn't care, and nor would RBS and Barclays, because the cost of compliance, the cost of AML, CTF, PE, the cost of regulating that dwarfs, you know, any money you can spend on the technology side of things. So ideas that save money on the regulatory side are much more important than ideas that save a little scrap of money on the financial side. So let me just flag that up with you to begin with. Look at this, banks post-crisis consultancy spending. Well, not all of these things are problems, obviously. Some of these things are just side effects of a changing economy. See, that's a funnier joke when there are more consultants in the audience. I completely miscalculated. I won't do this again, Michael. I miscalculated the audience completely. I apologize. Okay, so, but the good news is that in the finance industry, the blockchain is going to fix everything, so that's good news, right? You were all hoping that I was going to say that. And, well, it's not me saying that, it's everybody else saying that. Look at this. The blockchain is going to become the beating heart of the global financial systems. That's great. And the blockchain is, what else is it going to do? I can't read from here, sorry. Oh, yes, it's going to fix world poverty or something, isn't it, as well? Yes, okay, that's good. You know, well, you know, I don't want to sound on the fence about world poverty. I'm not. I mean, we're against it, aren't we, broadly speaking? So it's good that it's going to fix it. So how exactly it's going to fix it, not terribly clear from the magazine article, I had to say. So, but it's good news, it's going to fix it. So it's going to fix all our problems, that's very good. But it's also going to fix every other industry's problems as well, so that's very good too, right? So we're not just, you guys aren't just going to fix financial services, you're going to fix everything. And that's very good news as well. So look, we're going to fix the future energy system in an unspecified way, but I'm sure that's very good. Health we're going to hear about in a minute, so I'm looking forward to hearing about how it's going to fix health. Susan is very convincing about this, so I'll have to change this slide next time. But actually, this is one of my favorites. You guys probably think I'm making this up just for effect. I'm not. This is a real thing. This is, in the middle, how the blockchain is going to help to fight fires. And that's good news, because fires, well, they're bad things, right? And in some places, no, they're like in California at the moment, there's lots of them, far too many. So if the blockchain can fight fires, that's great news. Now, how the blockchain is going to fight fires, I couldn't say. I read the whole thing. It was not clear to me at all how the blockchain is going to fight. But like, let's focus on the goal, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not be moaners about this. It's going to fix firefighting in some way. Are there any firefighters in here who could help us out? No, see, I couldn't figure it out either. But it's you know, so, but it's good, right? Now, I saw a poll this morning because Michael sent it to me. So he did a poll of people who are, actually I didn't read the whole thing. Is it people that are coming to this, or it's just people in general, or it's people in general? And it said why you would ask people in general anything. I have the slightest idea. I just don't. I have no interest in what the general public think about anything, I can assure you. But your finding in your poll was that, and remember, he'd never seen these slides before, so this is going to be a big surprise to him as well. The finding in his poll was that almost half of people, the biggest sector that everybody thought the blockchain was going to fix, almost half in fact, was actually supply chain. So that, well, instead of talking about industry in general, right, let's pick a specific one, supply chain. Imagine my surprise when I got an email from Michael saying this was the top sector that the blockchain was going to, it was almost like a psychic, like the universe telling us something. So the blockchain is going to fix the supply chain. Well, that's very good, because there's all sorts of different problems in the supply chain, as you can see. And it's going to fix the global supply chain, was good. You've got to aim the bar quite high, right? But you don't want to start off too. It's going to fix the global supply chain, and it's going to stop fake Viagra. I don't know how that one stayed in there. I meant to paste that into something else, sorry. So, but that's okay, not for everybody in the room, but for some of us, this is a big priority. So let's not knock it. Don't discriminate against us, okay? So it's going to get rid of fake Viagra. That's a very good thing. And for our British, for the foreign visitors, it'll mean nothing. But remember the big burger scandal? Remember how shocking that was when you saw that headline? I mean, I was absolutely flabbergasted. I had no idea Tesco burgers had 29% meat in them. Did anybody else know this? I had no idea. I was completely taken aback. And whether it was horse or not, I couldn't care less. I mean, it was meat. That was a sort of good thing. But that was our big, so it was the horse thing. So the blockchain is going to keep horses out of burgers, right? So when people say, what use is a blockchain? It's going to keep horses out of burgers, right? You guys, you're not thinking high enough. Now, I have to say, I change this slide from time to time, because every time I think I've seen somebody say the stupidest thing imaginable about the blockchain, which is every week, by the way. So I think I've seen somebody say the stupidest thing about the blockchain, someone else comes along and tops it just like that, right? So I thought one of the stupidest things I've ever, I read a thing about the fashion industry. I was telling Andrew about this. You didn't believe me. You think I'm making this up. This is a real thing. It comes from the internet. So I'm reading a thing about the blockchain is going to revolutionize, you can look this up, the blockchain is going to revolutionize the fashion industry. And well, that's quite good, right? You can tell, right? It's my business, fashion. So it's going to revolutionize, so that's really good news. So I read about, and this, I didn't make this up. I actually took this out of remember, this is what your boss's boss is reading, is this stuff. How is the blockchain going to revolutionize the fashion industry? Well, because each block in the chain would belong to a different brand. And I want you to use that as a benchmark, right? If somebody says something really stupid to you about the blockchain, I want you to put it up against that. Because if you've seen something stupider, I want to know about it. I do. I'm on the leading edge. I pride myself on this. If you've got something stupider, I want to see it, okay? That's a real thing in a real magazine. A real person thinks that. People are listening to them. You think I don't quite understand the nuances of your blockchain proof of thingamy, whatever it is? Somebody out there thinks that every block in the blockchain is going to belong to a different fashion brand. I mean, that's such an unbelievable misunderstanding of what the technology is or what it can do. It's scarcely credible. But I'm here to tell you it's real. That's what people outside this room are thinking about the blockchain right now, Oh, and I forgot, it's going to change everything as well. Did I say everything? I said every industry, but it's going to change everything else as well, which is even better. So, for example, it's going to solve problems in charity. It's going to transform everything from banking, a blockchain democracy. It's going to transform democracy as well. And that's good news, isn't it? Because it's not working that well at the moment. See, I don't want to sound like, I'm not anti-democratic, okay? It's just not clear that everybody should be voting. That's my point about this sort of thing. Like it's you know what I mean? You can be too inclusive sometimes about things. So, but luckily the blockchain's going to fix that. How? I haven't got the faintest fucking idea. No. And I speak from a position of authority because you don't live in places of massive electoral fraud, but I do. In my home city of Woking, people have been to jail for electoral fraud recently. So oh yes, no, this is just talk for you, I'm living this stuff. In Woking, people are going to jail for electoral fraud. So how is the blockchain going to fix this? Haven't the slightest idea. You know what the government's current proposal is? And again, you can Google it right now if you think I'm making this up. There are 5 pilot areas in the UK where the government is going to trial a new voter identification service. Woking is one of them. And these stringent requirements, I'm glad Bill's not here because he would literally die of apoplexy if he heard this. You're going to be allowed to vote if you can produce a gas bill. The gold standard of identity, ladies, foreigners don't know this, but the British gas quarterly bill it puts the $100 bill to shame. It does. It's like the North Korean supernote forgers threw down their tools in frustration when faced with the British gas quarterly gas bill. But if you put your gas bill on the blockchain, we're going to have more democracy in Woking or something. I may have missed some of the details here occasionally. They think I'm joking, but I think it's funny. So there's a blockchain alliance for good. There really is a blockchain alliance for good. Because the blockchain's like a sort of superpower, isn't it? And we all have to decide whether we're going to use it for good or evil. So I'm having evil geniuses for blockchain. You're all welcome. It's just me at the moment, but you're all welcome to join. Because otherwise, these blockchain for good people are just going to have it all their own way. My point is, people are talking absolute bollocks about the blockchain at an industrial scale, okay? And somehow, if we're going to get stuff done, it's all very well sitting in the room, you with each other, talking about this stuff. But if we're going to get stuff done, we've got to get out and communicate to people why this is a new technology that's exciting and what it can do. And frankly, if you're going to do that by going and telling them it's going to solve world hunger, we're not going to get anywhere. Unfortunately, Angela stole my next slide, so I'm not going to spend much time on this. So we're going to pass over the mystical truth machine. I'm not going to mention it again. Well, I am going to mention, I spent time on this, and like you think this just looks thrown together, but I spent time on look, I made the reflection thing in PowerPoint for the stuff under throwaway, and it's all wasted. I should have just deleted the slide. I don't know why I'm bothering. Okay, so, but we understand the truth about blockchain, so we're going to go and communicate this to people now. We're going to find something good that the blockchain can do. So we're going to start by, what is a blockchain? I know you were looking forward to this at 3 o'clock in the afternoon after a whole day of this, but I need it for my narrative flow, okay? So we just have, what's a blockchain? We just need to pause for a second because we're going to be realistic about these things. So I went and looked in the FT. The FT's wrong, it doesn't matter, but it's the FT. So even the FT doesn't know that's the FT. And they couldn't say what a blockchain was. That's where firefighters getting cats out of trees. The FT couldn't even tell you what a blockchain is properly. So we have to back it up a little bit. So we're going to talk about what the blockchain is. And we're going to make it really simple. I'm going to make a really simple taxonomy that I'm going to refer back to in a moment about a couple of things. So this is my taxonomy, right? Nice and straightforward. So, can everybody access the ledger, or can only some people access the ledger? Okay. If everybody can access it, it's a public ledger. If only some people can access it, it's not too technical for you, Michael? Are we okay on? Okay, good. So if everybody can access it, it's a public ledger. If only some people can access it, it's a private ledger. So when somebody comes to me and says, by the way, this really happened, by the way, we're going to use identity to solve the refugee crisis by implementing on the blockchain. This really happened. So my first question is, well, it's interesting. Is it a private blockchain or a public blockchain? Because if they can't even answer that question, that's the most basic. If they can't even answer that, I completely lose interest at that point and just walk off. I'm a rude sod sometimes for this thing. I think we're nice people, We're going to use the blockchain to solve the refugee crisis by putting identities in blocks and chaining them. I didn't listen any further because they couldn't answer the first question. But just a tip, right? So if somebody says to you, we're going to use the blockchain for X, the first question is public or private? If they can't answer that, it's not worth going on. So if they say, well, okay, only some people can access it, it's a private blockchain. Well, then if it's a private blockchain, you ask the consensus question. And so, okay, if it's a private blockchain, who takes part in the consensus forming process? Like, who maintains the integrity of that private blockchain? Is it like, so suppose we're making a blockchain that's just for the people in this room. That's now a private blockchain, okay? So we're adding a transaction to that. So who gets to decide whether that's valid or not? Is it everybody in the room, everybody that can use the ledger, or is it just a subset of people who can decide? And of the subset of people who can decide, so for example, we might decide, okay, we're going to put transactions on the ledger, but only the women are allowed to vote as to whether those transactions are. That's perfectly acceptable. That's a consensus mechanism, okay? So now you have what's called a double permissioned ledger. Because you need permission to access the ledger, it's only the people in this room, but you also need permission to take part in the consensus forming process. It's a different kind of permission, but you need two kinds of permission. So that's a double permission ledger. If everybody in the room gets to take part in the consensus forming process, that's a permissioned ledger. So my next question, so when you say we're going to solve the refugee crisis by giving the refugees identities that we're going to put on the blockchain, my second question is, after they said it's a private ledger, my second question then is, okay, is it a double permissioned ledger or a permissioned ledger? Now, if people can't even answer that, you should throw up your hands and just, if it's not even thought through. Remember, we haven't even got on to talking about the content of the ledger yet. We're still talking about the structure. And if they can't even tell you that, you're entitled to be angry with them for wasting your time on this nonsense. Now, in a public ledger, we ask a slightly different question, which is to do with the tragedy of the commons, okay, well-known thing in economics, heart of the Scottish Enlightenment, home of Adam Smith. What's your favourite fact about Adam Smith? That's not my favourite one. I mean, that is a great fact about him, but it's not my... Surely everybody here's got one. He was kidnapped by gypsies when he was a baby. That's fantastic, isn't it? Like, that doesn't happen to every economist. It's a very... They didn't all get kidnapped. Oh, sorry, he was kidnapped by members of the travelling community when he was... I don't want to cause any offence. So the tragedy of the commons is, if it's a pub... So now, we're not talking about just for this room. Now we're talking about a public ledger. Anybody can access it. So if anybody can access it, why would I lift a finger to maintain the integrity? Right? Everybody else can do that, unless I'm a crook. In a public environment, the only incentive for me to do any work to maintain the integrity, whether it's voting, sticking my hand up, filling out a form, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. My only incentive for doing that is I'm a crook, and I want to change. You want to put the transaction on the ledger, I want to change it. That's the only reason why I would get involved. Otherwise, can't be bothered. Tragedy of the commons, let somebody else do it. So in a public ledger, it's a different question. It's not who gets to be part of the consensus forming process. It's why would anyone bother to be part of the consensus forming process? And there we have two obvious ways forward, right? So if I want you, like let's imagine we've got some new payment system we're inventing, and we want the different banks to take part in forming the consensus over that. What would be their incentive for doing it? Well, it could be licensing, it could be regulatory, it could be money. In a property register, you could imagine it being a condition of having a real estate license that you have to commit a certain amount of energy to taking part in the consensus forming. You could see that. That makes complete sense. So I can incentivize you to take part in that process, broadly speaking, in two ways. One way is off the ledger, right? I want you to take part in it, so I'm going to pay you to take part in the consensus forming process. There's a slight problem with paying you to take part in the consensus forming process, which is if you form a consensus that I don't like, I can decide not to pay you. So you think I'm a nice person, but actually I'm the mafia, right? So I pay you to take part in the consent. So wait a second, you said that that money belongs to him. Really, it belongs to me. I need you to change that. And you won't do it because of integrity or something. So I don't pay you anymore. I don't want you in my consensus forming crowd anymore. So if the incentives are off the ledger, they can be withdrawn, right? The alternative is the incentives are part of the ledger themselves, which is the Bitcoin example, in which case they can't be withheld. So that gives us two more. So we have permissionless ledgers, you don't need permission to take part in the ledger. But then you have double permissionless ledgers, where you don't need permission to take part in the ledger or take part in the consensus forming process. And that gives us 4 different kinds of ledger. And from my experience dealing with senior management, 3 options, they feel you're not telling them everything. 5 options starts to get a little confusing for them. 4 is a very good number to go to senior management with about this. So they say, we're going to make a ledger. Okay, here are 4 kinds of ledger. Pick which kind of ledger you're going to do. Okay? Now, I don't think I'm setting an unreasonably high bar if I say, look, here's 4 kinds of ledger, a straightforward taxonomy that anybody can understand. You're going to fix world hunger with the ledger. Great. What kind of ledger is it? Here's 4. Pick one. That's reasonable, right? If they can't, I don't think I'm being unreasonable by asking for that level of detail. Now, one little thing I want to say about that before we go too farther forward is that in this example, one of the reasons why any of those ledgers would be useful, absent anything to do with cryptocurrencies, tokens, permissionless, whatever, is once you have shared ledgers, you have a kind of transparency that we haven't had before. And my personal feeling is that this is an underexplored aspect of the... I'm very interested in all the kind of cool things that we can do, but it's the fundamentals that interest me in terms of shaping financial marketplaces. And, when I first came into financial services quite some time ago, I remember being told there are 3 big problems that we're supposed to be solving. Financial services were too slow, too expensive, and too opaque. And technology has pretty much dealt with I can send money from my phone to anybody else in this audience at the drop of a hat. It's all done instantly and it's free. I mean, technology has started to take care of the first thing. Competition regulation has started to take care of the second thing. But that third point about opacity, which is one of the root causes of the financial crisis, hasn't really been tackled yet. I'm annoyed with Bill for giving away some of my thunder on this morning, by the way, actually. So I'm not going to have the great reveal I thought I was going to have. So I'll just mope about that for a moment. So what if it isn't to do with speed, scale, whatever? What if it's actually the ability to construct markets that are more transparent, which actually turns out to be the key value here? And I will give you a straightforward banking example. So an example I like using. So imagine now that you're back in Depression era America. Okay, it's 1936. What's the biggest problem facing banks? I mean, this is Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger. Remember all this stuff? The biggest problem facing banks is robberies. And in those days, people used to be robbed by banks who didn't work for them. So it was a very different kind of... Come on, that's a funny joke. I know it's RBS. Give me a break. That's a good joke. In those days, the banks were robbed by people who didn't work for them. And it very often involved guns, right? So it's a very unpleasant kind of business all round. So there was a lot of thought about, what can we do to make our bank more... And then technology people like me would think, well, okay, we can dig a hole and put the bank underground and let people down by elevators or something like that. Or we can have rotating knives in the thing going, and if somebody hasn't done their PIN properly, then we start the knives, and that's how technologists like me would think about it. This is from Popular Mechanics magazine in 1936. And this is an illustration by Francis Keeley, who was a famous architect. In fact, he's very famous to architect. I'd never heard of him, but he's very famous in architectural circles. He was the first person who ever designed an airport, which I think is pretty cool. Like, if you're an architect, that's a nice badge to have, right? He's the first guy that ever designed an airport. And this is Popular Mechanics in 1936. And he said, no, if you want to stop banks from being robbed, you don't want to make them out of steel or concrete or bury them underground. If you want to stop the bank from being robbed, you need to make it out of glass. Because everybody walking past the bank can see what's going on. If you walk into the bank and try and hold people up, everybody walking past can see what's going on and they'll call the cops. He said the way to have more integrity is to have more transparency. And I think that metaphor of the glass bank is a really good way to think about what will be the more transformational aspect of the technology when it enters the mainstream. Like, what does it do that's, it's not like a database and blah, blah, blah. But this, and remember, but I'm living Bill's world. So when I say transparency, I don't mean everybody can see what everybody else is doing, right? What I mean is that everybody else can audit. So basically, I buy his Kool-Aid. And in fact, the slide I deleted that I was messing around with earlier on said, which I've taken out because Bill spoiled it all for me, was you've got to stop thinking about storing data on the blockchain, and you've got to start thinking about storing proofs of data on the blockchain, because that gives us the auditable privacy that we need in that transparent environment. And when he talked about homomorphic encryption in this space, what he meant was, I can go to the blockchain and I can compute that your assets exceed your liabilities without being able to read what any of those individual assets or liabilities are. So it's not just provable. But I can also prove, because the proofs are interactive, I can prove that I did it. So if I have to prove to a regulator that I checked that, I have proof that I did the proof. You see where I'm going with this? It's a kind of auditable privacy in a transparent environment. So if you want to talk about radical uses of the technology, this is the sort of stuff you should be thinking about. Like the stuff that cryptography can do, which is not obvious, which is not straightforward, which is counterintuitive in many ways. But it means the blockchain can implement something we haven't had before, which is the glass bank. Now, I gave that presentation a little while back without realizing that somebody in the audience came from Georgia. And she came and showed me this picture. This is in Tbilisi in Georgia. And in Georgia, the Georgian government are having a crackdown, an anti-corruption drive. And as part of the anti-corruption drive, they've started making some of the police stations out of glass so that everybody that's walking past can see what's going on inside the police station. And the architects that design these glass buildings have a word for it, and they call it ambient accountability. And I love that term so much that I stole it from architecture. And with Salome Paralova and Richard Brown from R3, we wrote a paper last year for the Journal of Payment Systems and Strategy, saying that ambient accountability is what the legacy of the last financial crisis that the blockchain is going to solve. Now, I want to give you one example outside financial services, just 5 minutes, I promise. I'll give you one example outside financial services to show why I think that's true. So when I was making fun of the supply chain stuff earlier on, you didn't notice my favorite supply chain fraud in the background. I skipped over. Everyone has a favorite supply chain fraud, don't they? I mean, broadly. Yours might be different, but my favorite supply chain fraud is the Great Salad Oil Scandal of 1963, which all students of supply chain fraud, they put it in the top three, probably. I mean, for me, number one, okay? And the Great Salad Oil fraud was, and this is, by the way, this is how Warren Buffett got to be a billionaire, because American Express were lending a guy money on the basis of salad oil stored in tanks. Salad oil is a valuable commodity, and he had tanks full of salad oil, and American Express lent him the money. And it turned out the tanks didn't really have salad oil in. They were full of water with a thin layer of salad oil on top, because this guy had figured out salad oil floats. So you only need a thin layer of salad oil. So the inspector looks in, he sees salad oil, but really it's just water. And when this was discovered, Amex were out hundreds of millions of dollars, and Amex collapsed, the stock price collapsed. The Dow Jones collapsed to the point where they had to halt trading on the Dow Jones because of the collapse. And Warren Buffett stepped in and bought the Amex shares, and that was his first step to becoming a multi-billionaire. And I'm convinced one of the reasons why that story isn't better known is because it happened the day Kennedy got shot in 1963. So it wasn't, you know, top of the news agenda the next. I mean, Twitter, it would have been different, but it was. Now, we live in a time when one of my favourite quotes from the FT last year, the day after Brexit, I was speaking to a good friend of mine. She works at the FT, and I was asking her, she goes, you know, it's a very unusual day because the Prime Minister's resigned and it's only the 4th most important story on the... So the news agenda shifted a bit. So the great salad oil scandal, Amex were lending money to Anthony Tino De Angelis. Actually, that would have been an alarm bell for me, lending money to people called Tino. I'm not, but you know, I'm not as experienced in risk analysis as Susan is. She can probably tell me there's a more algorithmic approach to this, so they were lending money to Anthony Tino De Angelis. By the way, just to show, algorithmic ways aren't always the best way. This is the blockchain, the global blockchain influencers list, right? I'm higher than Vitalik Buterin. This tells you how. So big data, my arse, frankly, is my question about this. So algorithms aren't always the best thing. Anyway, but the point, you need to read the story. So it collapsed. So when they went to investigate, discovered that American Express and some various other lenders had warehouse receipts for more salad oil than actually existed in the entire continental United States. Right? So had they been, so you see my point about blockchain, like knowing that I lent some money to whatever, but if you were able to look into a transparent market and simply compute without knowing who any of those things, you would just go, wait a second, there's more salad oil here than actually physically exists in the entire US. It's a reg tech, it's not a fintech, right? Those transparent markets will succeed, they will drain liquidity from the existing markets, not because the payments are cheaper or faster or anything else, but because they're cheaper to regulate in those transparent markets with homomorphic encryption and zero-knowledge proofs and shared ledgers that are maintained by industry stakeholders as well as the regulators. So I'm very positive about the blockchain. You guys are going to build some great stuff, but just it's not going to be the stuff that you're thinking about right now, I don't think. Thank you very much for listening.